Chapter 1. The Invitation. I stared at the ivory envelope in my hands, my name written in an elegant, familiar script I hadn't seen in 4 decades. My heart thudded against my ribs as I slowly broke the wax seal and pulled out the card inside. Caroline Walker requests the honor of your presence at the dedication of the Walker Memorial Bridge. Saturday, June 12th, 2 p.m. Reception to follow at Riverdale Gardens. Accompanying the formal invitation was a handwritten note. Diana, after all these years, I hope you will come. There are things that need to be said, amends to be made. Caroline. My hands trembled as I set down the invitation. Caroline Walker, my best friend from childhood through college, the woman I had once considered closer than a sister, the woman I hadn't spoken to in 40 years, since that terrible night when everything between us shattered beyond repair. At 67, I had built a good life in the decades since our falling out. The teaching career I loved, now in its twilight years, 2 wonderful adult children, 5 grandchildren who brightened my widowed existence. I had learned to live without Caroline's friendship, to fill the peculiar void that had once been occupied by our shared laughter, shared dreams, shared secrets. And now, this invitation, the Walker Memorial Bridge, it could only be named for Caroline's father, Senator Edward Walker, who had passed away last year according to the local newspaper, the man whose political ambitions had played a role in destroying our friendship. Should I go, risk reopening old wounds, or continue the silence that had defined our relationship for 4 decades? I carried the invitation to my study and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. There, in a box I rarely examined, was a faded photograph of 2 young women standing on a half-constructed bridge. Arms around each other's shoulders, faces alight with laughter, Caroline and me, both 18, celebrating the beginning of the original bridge construction, a project her father had championed as mayor before his ascent to state politics. We looked so young, so unaware of how life would separate us. Caroline with her patrician features and confident stance, already being groomed for the political dynasty her father envisioned. Me with my wilder curls and earnest smile. The scholarship student who had become Caroline's unlikely best friend in 7th grade when my family moved to Riverdale. I had declined Caroline's wedding invitation 39 years ago, sending a polite note and a modest gift without explanation. She had made no attempt to contact me afterward. Our mutual silence had hardened over the years into something that seemed permanent, immutable. Yet now, as I traced our youthful faces in the photograph, I felt a stirring of something I thought long buried. Curiosity, perhaps? Or maybe just the awareness that at our age, opportunities for closure were becoming increasingly rare. I reached for the phone and dialed my daughter Jessica's number. An invitation came today, I said when she answered. From Caroline Walker. The Caroline? Jessica asked, surprise evident in her voice. I had told my children little about the estrangement, only that Caroline and I had gone different directions after college. But they had sensed, as children do, that there was more to the story, a wound I never discussed. Yes, I confirmed. She's invited me to the dedication of a bridge named for her father. I'm considering going. Mom, Jessica said gently, I think you should. Whatever happened between you two, and I know something significant did, maybe it's time to face it. You're both in your 60s now. What's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen. My mind flashed to that rain-soaked night in 1982, to harsh words exchanged, to the revelation that had destroyed not just a friendship, but my entire understanding of the previous decade of my life. I'll think about it. I promised Jessica, though I already knew my decision. Some part of me had been waiting 40 years for this opportunity, for a chance to finally speak the unspeakable, to ask the questions that had haunted me through the decades. 3 days later, I sent my RSVP. I was going back to Riverdale, back to the bridge where so much had begun and ended, back to face Caroline Walker and the past we shared. Chapter 2. Return to Riverdale. Riverdale hadn't changed as much as I expected in the 4 decades since I'd last visited. The town square still had its Victorian gazebo, though the surrounding shops had been updated with trendier facades. The old library, where Caroline and I had spent countless hours studying, remained stately and serene, its brick exterior mellowed with age. Even my former home, a modest 2-story on Maple Street, looked remarkably similar. Though the maple trees had grown massive, their canopies creating deep shade over the front yard. I checked into the Riverdale Inn, a boutique hotel converted from an old mansion where Caroline and I had once attended a debutante ball. She as a participant, I as her guest, awkward in a borrowed gown. The contrasts in our lives had been stark even then, though Caroline had never seemed to notice or care about our different social stations. To her, I was simply Diana, her confidant, the friend who kept her grounded amid the expectations of her politically ambitious family. The afternoon before the bridge dedication, I walked along the river path, remembering how Caroline and I had cycled this route countless times, planning our futures with the absolute certainty of youth. She would follow her father into politics, become the first female governor, maybe even president one day. I would become a renowned journalist, uncovering truths and fighting injustice with my words. We would change the world together, each in our own way. Life had taken different turns for both of us. According to occasional glimpses in news articles over the years, Caroline had indeed entered politics, serving 3 terms as a state representative before assuming her father's Senate seat when he retired. She had married Alexander Reed, a prominent attorney from another political family, had 3 children, and was now mentioned as a potential presidential candidate for the next election cycle. My path had been more modest, but satisfying in its own way, teaching high school English, marrying David, a kind mathematics professor, raising our 2 children in a college town 2 states away from Riverdale. After David's death from cancer 8 years ago, I had thrown myself into volunteer work and grandparenting, finding purpose in smaller spheres of influence than I had once imagined. I paused at a bend in the river where the old bridge had once stood and the new one was now nearly complete. The original structure had been condemned 5 years ago, according to the newspaper article announcing Edward Walker's death and the plans for the memorial bridge. The article had mentioned Caroline spearheading the funding effort in her father's honor, ensuring the new bridge would be both beautiful and functional, a fitting tribute to his legacy. I thought I might find you here. The voice behind me was older, more measured, but still unmistakably Caroline's. I turned slowly, bracing myself for the impact of seeing her after 40 years. She stood a few feet away, elegant in a simple blue dress that complemented her silver hair, which was styled in a sophisticated bob, perfect for the campaign trail, I thought automatically. Her posture was as straight as ever, her gaze as direct, though fine lines now framed her eyes and mouth. Time had been kind to Caroline, softening rather than hardening her features. "Hello, Caroline," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Diana." She took a step closer, hesitated. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted. "It's been a long time." "Too long," she said quietly, "though I understand why." Did she? I wondered. Did she truly understand what that night had meant to me, how it had altered the course of my life? Or had it been just one of many political maneuvers in her rise to power? "I'm sorry about your father," I offered, because it seemed the appropriate thing to say, regardless of my complicated feelings toward Senator Edward Walker. "Thank you." Caroline glanced toward the new bridge, nearly complete except for some finishing touches. "He was proud of this town, Whatever else he may have been. Whatever else he may have been. The words hung between us, loaded with meaning. Would you walk with me? She asked, after a moment. There's something I'd like to show you before tomorrow's ceremony. Curiosity overcame my apprehension. All right. We walked in silence for a few minutes. Following the river path away from town toward the wooded area where we had once built a makeshift fort as teenagers, declaring it our sanctuary from Caroline's oppressive household rules and my family's financial struggles. Do you remember this? Caroline asked as we approached a massive oak tree, its trunk now twice the diameter it had been in our youth. Our thinking tree, I said, surprised she remembered the nickname we had given it. Of course. Caroline reached into her pocket and withdrew a small pocket knife, an expensive one by the look of it, with a pearl handle and gleaming blade. Look, she said, pointing to a spot about eye level on the trunk. There, weathered by time but still visible, were our initials carved inside a rough heart, CW plus DS, Forever Friends, 1973. You carved that the summer before 9th grade, I recalled, right after I told you about my parents' divorce. It had been a painful time. My family fracturing while Caroline's seemed perfect, untouchable. She had brought me here, produced a knife borrowed from her brother, and solemnly carved our friendship into the living wood as a testament to its permanence. I thought we would be in each other's lives forever, Caroline said softly. Best friends, confidants, champions of each other's dreams. She traced the carving with her fingertip. I never imagined we would become strangers. Neither did I admitted. But life had other plans. Caroline turned to face me fully, her blue eyes, so like her father's, searching mine. Diana, I asked you here because I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 40 years ago, the night everything fell apart. My heart quickened. Was this it? The explanation I had waited decades to hear? She stopped as her phone chimed with an incoming text. With an apologetic glance, she checked the screen. I'm sorry, it's my campaign manager. There's an issue I need to address before tomorrow. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. Would you have dinner with me tonight? At the Riverside Grill? 7 o'clock? We can talk properly then. Part of me wanted to refuse, to demand answers now, rather than endure more hours of uncertainty. But I nodded. 7 o'clock. Thank you. Relief softened her features. She hesitated, then added, I know you have every reason to doubt me, but I promise you this. By the end of tomorrow, you'll know the whole truth. Whatever happens after that will be entirely your decision. As I watched her walk away, her posture perfect, her pace measured, I wondered what truth could possibly justify 40 years of silence, and whether, after all this time, it would make any difference to the person I had become in her absence. Chapter 3. Dinner and Disclosures. The Riverside Grill had once been a simple local diner called Mary's Place, where Caroline and I had shared countless milkshakes while discussing everything from school gossip to global politics. Now it was an upscale restaurant with white tablecloths and a wine list longer than the food menu. Caroline had reserved a private dining room in the back, away from curious eyes. I arrived a few minutes early, dressed in a navy pantsuit that had seemed appropriate for the occasion. Formal enough for the setting, but not overly fussy. Caroline was already there, studying a document which she quickly tucked away as I entered. Campaign business? I asked as I took the seat across from her. She smiled ruefully. It never stops, especially with the announcement coming up next month. She closed the folder definitively. But that's not why we're here tonight. A waiter appeared with water and menus, explaining the evening specials with practiced eloquence. We ordered, Caroline choosing salmon, me selecting chicken, and declined the wine list in favor of sparkling water. I stopped drinking alcohol during my first campaign, Caroline explained once the waiter had departed. Too easy for opponents to twist a single glass of wine into a narrative about judgment or control. Politics seems exhausting, I observed, always being watched, evaluated. It is. She took a sip of water. But it's also exhilarating, making real change, helping constituents solve problems, shaping policy that affects millions of lives. Her eyes lit with genuine passion. I know we set our sights on this path when we were too young to understand the sacrifices it would require. But I've never regretted following it. I thought of my own career, so different from my youthful ambitions of hard-hitting journalism. I ended up teaching, I said. High school English. I know, Caroline replied, then looked slightly embarrassed. I've kept track of you over the years. Nothing intrusive. Just checking occasionally to see how you were doing. The idea that Caroline had been monitoring my life from afar was unsettling. How? I asked. Social media, mostly. Your school's website. Your daughter Jessica's photography business page has lovely family photos. She met my gaze directly. I hope that doesn't seem like an invasion of privacy. I just needed to know you were okay. Before I could respond to this revelation, our salads arrived. We ate in silence for a few moments, the weight of unspoken history hanging between us. You mentioned needing to tell me something, I finally said, setting down my fork. Something about that night. Caroline nodded, her expression turning solemn. Yes, about the night of the graduation party at Richardson Lake. About what my father said to you. I stiffened involuntarily. Even after 40 years, the memory of that confrontation sent a chill through me. Senator Walker, then just beginning his first term, had pulled me aside during the celebration, his smile pleasant, but his eyes cold as ice. I know about the article you're planning to write, he had said, keeping his voice low as jubilant graduates celebrated around us. About the campaign donations from Westlake Industries. About the zoning coincidences that benefited my biggest donors. I had been interning at the local newspaper, working on what I believed would be a breakthrough investigative piece about corruption in local politics. I had told no one about it except Caroline, swearing her to secrecy. It would be a shame, he had continued, if your mother lost her position at the hospital, or if your scholarship to Columbia was suddenly rescinded due to character concerns. Small towns have long memories, Diana, and journalists who can't be trusted with confidential information don't get very far. When I confronted Caroline afterward, devastated by the betrayal, she had denied telling her father about my investigation. We had argued bitterly in the rain outside the lake house, years of friendship dissolving in a matter of minutes. I had driven back to town in a fury, collected the research from my apartment, and burned it in the sink. The next morning, I withdrew from Columbia and accepted the position at a smaller state university far from Riverdale. I never spoke to Caroline again. I didn't tell him, Caroline said now, her voice pulling me back to the present. I need you to know that. I never betrayed your confidence. Our main courses arrived, momentarily interrupting the conversation. Once the waiter had departed, I found my voice. And how did he know about my investigation? I told no one else. Caroline set down her fork, her food untouched. He had your apartment bugged. What? The word came out as a strangled whisper. After you mentioned working on something big for the newspaper, something that had to remain secret, he became paranoid. He had already arranged for the campaign donations you were investigating. He was afraid any exposure would derail his Senate ambitions. She took a deep breath. So he had a listening device planted in your apartment. That's how he knew the details. The room seemed to tilt around me. My apartment was bugged by a sitting state senator? Yes. Caroline's expression was grim. I didn't know about it until 2 weeks after graduation, when I overheard him talking to his campaign manager about ensuring the problem had been permanently resolved. She pushed her plate away. When I confronted him, he admitted what he'd done, said it was necessary, that sometimes in politics you had to take extreme measures to protect your position. And you didn't think to tell me this? I asked, anger beginning to replace shock. To clear your name? To warn me I was being spied on? I tried to call you, Caroline said. Multiple times. Your number was disconnected. I went to your apartment, but you had already moved out. I even drove to your mother's house, but she said you wanted nothing to do with me or my family. She met my gaze squarely. By the time I tracked down your new address at the State University, you were firmly established there, dating David, building a new life. I wrote you a letter explaining everything, but she trailed off. But what? But my father intercepted it, told me he'd taken care of it. I was young, still under his thumb financially and emotionally. I believed him when he said it was better to let you move on, that reopening the wound would only hurt you more. She sighed. It wasn't until years later that I found the unsent letter in his files. He had never mailed it. I sat back, trying to absorb this new information. Caroline hadn't betrayed me to her father. Instead, he had violated my privacy, threatened my future, and successfully driven a wedge between me and his daughter, who might otherwise have diverted from the political path he had chosen for her. Why tell me now? I asked. After 40 years? Because he's gone, Caroline said simply. Because I'm finally free of his influence, his legacy. Because I'm considering running for president, and I can't move forward carrying this weight. She reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. And because you deserved better than what happened, you deserved the truth then, and you deserve it now. I studied her face, looking for signs of the political calculation her father had been so famous for. But all I saw was genuine regret and a weariness that suggested this conversation had been rehearsed in her mind countless times. There's more, she continued when I remained silent. Tomorrow at the bridge dedication, I'd like you to be there to hear what I have to say. Then you can decide whether 40 years is too long to rebuild what we lost, or if some bridges, once collapsed, can never be truly replaced. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it was sincere. As our desserts arrived, peach cobbler for her, chocolate cake for me, our favorites from childhood, I found myself wondering what Caroline had planned for tomorrow's ceremony. And whether any explanation, however genuine, could possibly make up for 4 decades of silence. Chapter 4. The Bridge. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for an outdoor ceremony. I dressed carefully in a sage green dress I had packed specifically for the occasion, applied minimal makeup, and wondered if I was preparing for reconciliation or merely closure. The crowd at the bridge site was substantial. Local officials, community leaders, and ordinary citizens gathered to honor the late Senator Walker and witness the dedication of the structure that would bear his name. A podium had been set up at the bridge's entrance, chairs arranged in neat rows before it. As a formally invited guest, I was escorted to the front row, where a seat had been reserved with my name on it. Caroline was nowhere to be seen, presumably preparing for her role in the ceremony. I nodded politely to those who glanced curiously at me, aware that few in this town would remember Diana Sullivan, the quiet scholarship student who had been Caroline Walker's shadow decades ago. At precisely 2 o'clock, the mayor approached the podium to begin the proceedings. His welcome speech was brief, followed by remarks from several local officials praising Edward Walker's dedication to the community and his national service. Black and white photographs of the original bridge construction were displayed on an easel beside the podium, including one that made my breath catch, the same image I kept in my desk drawer, Caroline and me at 18, standing arm in arm on the half-finished structure. Finally, Caroline was introduced. She approached the podium with the confident stride I remembered, though tempered now with the dignity of age. She wore a simple blue suit, her silver hair catching the sunlight as she adjusted the microphone. Thank you all for coming today to honor my father's memory and to celebrate this beautiful new bridge, she began. Infrastructure may not be the most glamorous aspect of public service, but it is perhaps the most tangible. Bridges, quite literally, connect us. They allow us to cross divides, to reach places that would otherwise remain separated by natural barriers, She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd before settling on me. Today, I want to talk about a different kind of bridge, the connections between people. Connections that can be damaged or destroyed by deception, by pride, by misunderstanding. A murmur passed through the audience. This was clearly not the standard dedication speech they had expected. 40 years ago, Caroline continued, I lost my closest friend because of actions taken by my father, actions I was unaware of at the time, but for which I have borne the consequences ever since. He made choices that served his political ambitions, but damaged the people around him, including his own family. The crowd had gone completely silent now, riveted by this unexpected turn. My father believed that power justified any means used to attain or maintain it. He believed that personal relationships should be subordinate to political goals. He taught me that loyalty to family, to legacy, outweighed all other considerations. Her voice remained steady, though I could see the emotion she was controlling. It has taken me decades to unlearn these lessons, to recognize that public service is meaningless if it comes at the expense of personal integrity. She looked directly at me now, speaking as if we were alone, despite the hundreds of witnesses. Diana, 40 years ago, my father destroyed something precious, our friendship, because he feared your integrity, your unwillingness to look away from corruption. He bugged your apartment, threatened your future, and deliberately created a rift between us that has lasted a lifetime. Gasps rippled through the audience. This was not merely airing family laundry. It was a public admission of serious ethical and possibly legal violations by a revered political figure. For years, I told myself that protecting his legacy was my duty as his daughter and as a Walker, that maintaining the family reputation served a greater good. Caroline's voice finally wavered slightly. I was wrong. The greatest good is truth. The most important legacy is integrity. She straightened her shoulders, addressing the wider audience again. This bridge will not bear my father's name as planned. Instead, it will be called the Sullivan-Walker Friendship Bridge, honoring not what was lost, but what might still be rebuilt. The plaque will acknowledge both Diana Sullivan, whose early investigative work attempted to expose corruption in local politics, and the Walker family's commitment to transparency and ethical governance going forward. The crowd erupted in confused murmurs. Local officials on the stage behind Caroline exchanged alarmed glances. This was clearly not the script they had been given. Furthermore, Caroline continued over the noise. I am establishing the Sullivan-Walker Investigative Journalism Scholarship at Riverdale Community College to support students committed to holding power accountable through ethical reporting. She took a deep breath, her gaze finding mine again. Diana, I can't restore the 40 years we lost. I can't undo the choices that altered both our paths, but I can acknowledge the truth, publicly and without reservation. I can honor who you were, who we were, even as I ask your forgiveness for my part in the silence that followed. Tears blurred my vision as Caroline stepped away from the podium and walked directly to where I sat. She extended her hand, not presuming a closer contact, offering me the choice to accept or reject this public olive branch. The rational part of me noted the political calculation that might be behind this gesture. A presidential candidate demonstrating integrity, acknowledging past wrongs, creating a narrative of growth and reconciliation. But there was genuine vulnerability in Caroline's eyes that no political training could manufacture. I stood slowly and took her offered hand. Then, following an impulse I hadn't anticipated, I pulled her into an embrace. 40 years is too long, I whispered, but maybe not too late. I felt, rather than heard her exhale, a release of tension held for decades. When we stepped apart, there were tears on both our faces, quickly blinked away as we became aware again of the crowd around us. The mayor, recovering his composure, invited us both to unveil the bridge plaque, not the one that had been prepared with Edward Walker's name, but a temporary one bearing the new designation Caroline had announced. A permanent version would be created in the coming weeks. As we pulled the covering away together, I saw our names linked on the metal surface, an unexpected immortalization of a friendship I had believed long dead. A bridge between past and present, between what was lost and what might still be found. "Are you angry about the scholarship?" Caroline asked quietly as the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse toward the reception. "I should have asked you first." But I wanted it to be a surprise. "Not angry," I assured her. "Stunned, overwhelmed, a bit suspicious of your political motivations," I added honestly. She smiled ruefully. "Fair enough. I won't pretend there isn't potential political benefit to publicly acknowledging past wrongs. Integrity plays well with voters these days." Her expression sobered. "But this wasn't calculated, Diana. This was necessary. For me, personally, regardless of any campaign." I studied her face, searching for the girl I had once known, beneath the polished exterior of the seasoned politician. "We can't go back to who we were," I said finally. "Too much life has happened in between." "I know," she nodded. "But perhaps we can get to know who we've become, if you're willing." Before I could respond, Caroline's assistant appeared, apologetically informing her that the press wanted statements about the unexpected change to the bridge dedication. "Duty calls," I observed. "Always." She hesitated. "I'll be in town until tomorrow afternoon. Perhaps breakfast? To talk without an audience?" I thought of the life waiting for me back home. My quiet routines, my grandchildren's visits, the book club and volunteer work that filled my days. And I thought of the girl I had been, whose dreams had included not just career ambitions, but this friendship that had shaped my early years so profoundly. "Breakfast would be nice," I said. "The hotel restaurant at 8? Caroline's smile, the real one, not the practiced version she offered constituents, briefly transformed her face, revealing the friend I had lost decades ago. "I'll be there." As I watched her move toward the waiting reporters, answering questions with practiced ease while still conveying genuine emotion, I wondered what might come of this unexpected reunion. Not a restoration of what was lost. That girl was gone, along with the will that had shaped her. But perhaps something new, something honest, built on the ruins of what had come before. The Sullivan-Walker Friendship Bridge gleamed in the afternoon sun, a physical manifestation of the possibility of reconnection after profound rupture. Whether the human bridge being tentatively reconstructed would prove as durable remained to be seen. But for the first time in 40 years, I allowed myself to hope that some divides, however wide, could eventually be crossed.